Today, I want to speak about a topic that might seem paradoxical at first, the fear of God. In our everyday lives, fear is often seen as something negative, something to avoid. We fear danger, failure, rejection, and the unknown. But when we talk about the fear of God, we mean something entirely different. It is a reverent, awe-filled respect for the divine, a recognition of God's majesty, power, and holiness. It is a fear that doesn't paralyze us, but rather, it empowers and transforms us. When we hear the phrase fear of God, we might imagine punishment, judgment, or wrath. But in a spiritual sense, the fear of God is not about living in terror of divine punishment. Instead, it's about having a profound respect and awe for who God is, His greatness, wisdom, and justice. The Bible often speaks of the fear of God as the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs 9 verse 10. It's a recognition that God is far greater than we can imagine, and that our lives are in His hands. The fear of God, then, is not a fear that makes us run away from Him, but one that draws us closer. It reminds us of His power, but also of His mercy and love. It reminds us of our responsibility to live according to His will, with humility and obedience. It is a fear rooted in reverence, not anxiety. One of the most profound aspects of the fear of God is its connection to wisdom. Scripture tells us, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction," Proverbs 1 verse 7. Why is this fear the beginning of wisdom? Because it humbles us. When we fear God, we acknowledge our limitations and understand that we are not the ultimate source of knowledge or power. We begin to see life through a new lens, one that aligns with God's truth, rather than our own limited understanding. In a world that often promotes self-reliance, the fear of God teaches us that true wisdom comes from recognizing our dependence on Him. It teaches us that the decisions we make, the way we live, and the values we hold must be aligned with a higher moral standard, not just our own desires or societal trends. The fear of God also serves as a moral compass, guiding us to live with integrity and righteousness. When we fear God, we are mindful of His presence in every aspect of our lives. We begin to ask ourselves, is this choice honoring God? Am I living in a way that reflects His goodness and love? This fear compels us to seek what is right and just, to treat others with respect, and to avoid harmful actions. This kind of fear is not restrictive, it's liberating. It frees us from the fear of human judgment, from the pressure to conform to worldly expectations. When our deepest concern is to honor God, we no longer need to worry about the opinions or approval of others. The fear of God empowers us to live boldly, with integrity and courage, knowing that we are accountable to a higher authority. It's essential to understand that the fear of God is deeply connected to love. These two concepts are not at odds with each other, rather, they complement and enhance one another. When we fear God, we recognize His holiness and justice, but we also acknowledge His deep and abiding love for us. This fear, grounded in love, is what keeps us close to God, encouraging us to trust Him even in our moments of doubt and weakness. 1 John 4 verse 18 tells us, "There is no fear in love." But perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. This might seem contradictory, but what it really means is that the fear we experience in God's love is not the kind that terrifies us but transforms us. The more we understand God's love, the less we fear judgment or punishment. Instead, our fear of God becomes one of reverence, guiding us to live in alignment with His will out of gratitude and love for Him. Lastly, the fear of God gives us courage. When we stand in awe of God's power, we realize that nothing in this world can compare to His greatness. This realization gives us the strength to face our fears, whether they are fears of failure, rejection, or uncertainty, knowing that God is in control. When we fear God, we don't need to be afraid of anything else, for we trust in His sovereignty. Think of the story of David and Goliath. David's courage didn't come from his own strength, but from his fear of and faith in God. He knew that God was far greater than the giant before him. When we fear God, we too can face life's challenges with boldness and confidence, knowing that He is with us every step of the way. The fear of God is not a fear that cripples or discourages us. It is a fear that inspires and transforms us. It leads us to wisdom, guides us in righteousness, and empowers us to live boldly in a world full of uncertainty. It is a fear rooted in love, reverence, and awe for the one who is greater than we can ever comprehend. So, let us embrace the fear of God, not as something to dread, but as a profound respect for His power and majesty, and a recognition of His love and grace in our lives. In fearing God, we find the strength, wisdom, and courage to live as He calls us to live. A God-fearing individual is someone who lives with deep reverence, respect, and awe for God. This mindset is often misunderstood as living in constant terror of divine punishment, but in reality, the fear of God is rooted in reverence, not anxiety. It is an attitude that acknowledges the power, holiness, and sovereignty of God while guiding a person to live a life of integrity, humility, and compassion. Being God-fearing is not about fear in the traditional sense, but about aligning one's life with the will of God, knowing that He is both just and loving. This fear shapes a person's character, fosters wisdom, and encourages a life grounded in moral principles and love for others. To be God-fearing means to live with a constant awareness of God's presence, majesty, and authority. It is an understanding that God is the creator of all things, infinitely greater than human beings, and deserving of profound respect. This reverence is not about living in dread of punishment, but about acknowledging God's holiness and His ultimate judgment. The Bible often speaks of the fear of God as the foundation of wisdom. Proverbs 9 verse 10 tells us, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." This fear is not one that paralyzes a person, but one that motivates them to live rightly, to seek what is good, and to avoid what is evil. A God-fearing individual recognizes that life has eternal consequences and that their actions, thoughts, and words should be guided by a desire to honor and glorify God. A central aspect of being God-fearing is the way it informs a person's moral compass. Those who fear God live with a sense of accountability to Him, striving to act in ways that reflect His teachings. This fear inspires a commitment to righteousness, honesty, and integrity in all aspects of life. A God-fearing individual does not act out of fear of human judgment or societal expectations, but out of a deep desire to please God and live according to His commandments. This reverence for God influences how a person treats others as well. Being God-fearing leads to compassion, kindness, and fairness. In recognizing the dignity of every human being as part of God's creation, a God-fearing individual seeks to love others as God commands. The fear of God compels them to uphold justice, to be merciful, and to care for those in need. In this way, the fear of God does not isolate a person but deepens their connection to the world, motivating them to live as a reflection of divine love and justice. Wisdom, according to Scripture, begins with the fear of God. This wisdom is not simply intellectual knowledge, but a deep understanding of life, rooted in humility before God. A God-fearing individual recognizes their limitations and their dependence on God's guidance. They do not rely solely on their own understanding but seek God's wisdom in all things. This kind of wisdom is practical, influencing everyday decisions and behaviors. It teaches humility, as the fear of God reminds individuals that they are not the center of the universe, but part of a much larger divine plan. It encourages patience, as the fear of God fosters trust in His timing and purpose, even in difficult circumstances. And it promotes self-discipline, as the fear of God leads people to make choices that align with His will, even when those choices are difficult or counter to societal pressures. Being God-fearing teaches a person to prioritize what truly matters: faith, integrity, compassion, and service to others, over the pursuit of worldly success or selfish desires. This wisdom, grounded in the fear of God, is what enables individuals to navigate life's challenges with grace and strength. Far from being a weakness, the fear of God is a source of profound strength. When a person lives with a reverent awareness of God's power and sovereignty, they are no longer driven by fear of the unknown, fear of failure, or fear of human judgment. Their fear is centered on God alone, and this gives them the courage to face life's trials with confidence. Consider the biblical example of David, who, as a young shepherd, faced the giant Goliath. David's strength did not come from his own abilities or experience, but from his deep fear of and faith in God. He understood that God was far greater than any human obstacle, and this gave him the courage to confront the seemingly impossible. In the same way, a God-fearing individual draws strength from their relationship with God, knowing that He is in control and that His power surpasses all human limitations. This strength also manifests in the ability to endure suffering and hardship. A God-fearing individual trusts in God's ultimate justice and mercy, knowing that their suffering is not meaningless but part of a larger, divine plan. This trust allows them to persevere through difficulties with hope and faith, knowing that God is with them every step of the way. Humility is one of the key virtues cultivated by the fear of God. When individuals recognize the greatness of God, they also recognize their own smallness in comparison. This understanding does not diminish their sense of worth but places it in the proper context. They are valuable because they are created by God and loved by Him, but they are not the ultimate authority over their own lives. Being God-fearing encourages humility because it reminds individuals that they are accountable to a higher power. It teaches them to rely on God's wisdom rather than their own understanding and to submit to His will rather than pursuing selfish desires. This humility is not self-deprecation but an acknowledgement of one's place in God's creation. It allows people to serve others with love and generosity, knowing that their actions are a reflection of God's goodness. Being a God-fearing individual means living with a deep reverence for God's power, wisdom, and love. It is not about being afraid of punishment, but about recognizing the majesty and holiness of God and aligning one's life with His will. The fear of God serves as a guide for moral living, fostering integrity, compassion, and a sense of responsibility toward others. It is the foundation of wisdom, teaching humility, patience, and trust in God's plan. Moreover, it is a source of strength, enabling individuals to face life's challenges with courage and resilience. Ultimately, being God-fearing shapes a person's character, leading them to live with purpose, wisdom, and love. It deepens their relationship with God and encourages them to reflect His goodness in all they do. In fearing God, individuals find not only reverence but also freedom, the freedom to live as God intended, with integrity, strength, and compassion. Fearing God is a concept that holds deep significance in various religious and philosophical traditions. It is often misunderstood as a feeling of dread or terror in the face of divine punishment, but in reality, fearing God as an individual is much more profound. It is about cultivating a sense of awe, reverence, and respect for God's power, wisdom, and holiness. The fear of God shapes one's life by guiding decisions, fostering moral integrity, promoting humility, and leading to personal growth. For those who embrace this fear, it serves as a foundation for wisdom and a compass for righteous living. When we speak of fearing God, we are not referring to fear in the typical sense of being afraid of harm or punishment. Instead, it is a reverential fear, grounded in the recognition of God's greatness and the acknowledgement of His authority over all creation. This fear inspires a sense of humility and accountability, encouraging individuals to live in accordance with God's will, rather than pursuing selfish desires or worldly standards. To fear God means to be aware of His omnipotence, justice, and moral perfection. It is the recognition that God is both loving and just, capable of mercy but also holding us accountable for our actions. This understanding leads to a desire to live a life that reflects God's goodness and aligns with His commandments. It is a fear that motivates rather than paralyzes, guiding individuals to pursue virtue, avoid wrongdoing, and grow spiritually. The Bible and other religious texts often describe the fear of God as the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 9 verse 10 states, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." This type of fear leads to wisdom because it is rooted in humility. A person who fears God acknowledges that their knowledge and understanding are limited, and they turn to God for guidance and direction. In this sense, fearing God opens the door to true wisdom, which goes beyond intellectual knowledge and encompasses a deeper understanding of life's purpose and meaning. It encourages individuals to seek God's guidance in their decisions and to trust His plan, even when it is difficult to understand. This fear leads to a mindset of learning and growth, recognizing that life is a journey in which individuals are constantly evolving and being shaped by their relationship with God. Moreover, the wisdom that comes from fearing God helps individuals navigate the complexities of life with clarity and discernment. It enables them to make moral choices, distinguish right from wrong, and avoid paths that lead to destruction. This wisdom is not just theoretical but practical, influencing daily actions, relationships, and goals. One of the most significant aspects of fearing God is its impact on an individual's moral character. Those who fear God live with a sense of accountability that influences how they act, think, and treat others. The awareness that they are constantly in the presence of a holy and just God encourages them to strive for integrity in all aspects of life. Fearing God encourages a person to follow His commandments, not out of a legalistic obligation, but out of a genuine desire to honor and respect Him. It fosters a commitment to ethical living, honesty, and kindness. A person who fears God will strive to live according to the highest moral standards, not just when others are watching, but in every moment, knowing that their actions are ultimately seen by God. This reverence for God also fosters a deep sense of compassion and responsibility toward others. Recognizing that all human beings are created in the image of God, a God-fearing individual is compelled to treat others with dignity, respect, and love. The fear of God, therefore, does not isolate a person in self-righteousness, but rather opens them up to serve others, acting as a reflection of God's goodness and mercy in the world. Another vital component of fearing God is humility. To fear God means to recognize one's own limitations and imperfections in contrast to God's infinite power and wisdom. This recognition does not lead to a sense of worthlessness, but to an understanding of one's true place in the divine order. Humility, fostered by the fear of God, teaches individuals to rely not on their own strength or wisdom, but on God's guidance and support. It reminds them that their achievements, talents, and possessions are not solely the result of their own efforts, but gifts from God. This understanding fosters a spirit of gratitude and reliance on God, rather than pride and self-sufficiency. Humility also helps individuals approach life's challenges with patience and resilience. When things go wrong, the God-fearing individual does not despair or become arrogant in trying to control every outcome. Instead, they trust in God's plan and submit to His will, knowing that God's perspective is far greater than their own. This humility leads to inner peace, as individuals accept that their lives are in God's hands and that He will provide for their needs in His own time. Contrary to what one might expect, fearing God brings about inner strength and courage. When an individual fears God, they no longer need to fear anything else. They are not driven by the fear of human judgment, failure, or uncertainty because they know that God is ultimately in control. This awareness gives them the courage to face challenges, endure hardships, and stand up for what is right, even in the face of opposition. For example, in the biblical story of Daniel, we see a man whose fear of God gave him the strength to defy a king's decree and face the threat of death in a lion's den. His reverence for God was greater than his fear of earthly rulers or consequences, and as a result, he found the strength to remain faithful to his beliefs. Similarly, a God-fearing individual draws strength from their faith, trusting that God's power is greater than any challenge they may face. This strength is not about aggression or dominance, but is rooted in peace and confidence. It comes from knowing that God's justice will prevail, and that one's life has meaning and purpose beyond the immediate circumstances. This sense of security empowers individuals to live with integrity and courage, no matter the trials they encounter. Fearing God as an individual is not about living in constant terror, but about cultivating a profound reverence and respect for God's authority, wisdom, and love. This fear leads to wisdom, guiding individuals to make morally sound decisions and to live with integrity and humility. It fosters moral accountability, encouraging people to live lives of compassion, justice, and righteousness. Far from being a source of weakness, the fear of God is a source of inner strength, providing the courage to face life's challenges with faith and trust in God's ultimate plan. In fearing God, individuals find both purpose and peace, knowing that their lives are aligned with the will of the Creator. This fear leads to a deeper relationship with God, characterized by trust, humility, and an unwavering commitment to live according to His commandments. At a glance, fear is something we usually associate with anxiety, danger, or the unknown. But when we speak of the fear of God, we mean something much deeper and more profound. It is not a fear that terrifies or discourages, rather, it is a reverent respect and awe for the Creator of the universe, a recognition of His greatness, His holiness, and His authority over all things. The phrase fear of God might initially seem daunting, but it is not about living in terror of divine punishment. To fear God means to respect and honor Him as the sovereign Lord of all creation. It's an understanding that He is just and powerful, but also merciful and loving. This kind of fear does not push us away from God, instead, it draws us closer to Him. It inspires a deep sense of humility and responsibility to live according to His will. When we fear God, we recognize His authority over our lives. We acknowledge that He sees and knows all things, and that we are accountable to Him for our actions. This kind of fear instills within us a desire to live righteously, to make choices that reflect our respect for His holiness and His commandments. The fear of God as the foundation of wisdom. One of the most beautiful aspects of fearing God is that it leads to wisdom. Proverbs 9 verse 10 tells us, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Why is this the case? Because fearing God humbles us. It makes us realize that we do not have all the answers and that our understanding is limited. The fear of God encourages us to seek His guidance in everything we do, recognizing that He is the source of true wisdom. When we approach life with this reverence for God, we begin to make decisions that are not only smart but aligned with His will. This fear teaches us to avoid what is wrong, to pursue what is right, and to live with integrity. It helps us to prioritize eternal values over temporary, worldly gains. In fearing God, we embrace wisdom that transcends human understanding and guides us in every aspect of life. Fear of God and moral integrity. The fear of God also serves as a powerful guide for moral living. When we fear God, we are constantly aware of His presence and His standards for how we should live. This fear shapes our character and motivates us to act with integrity. We strive to be honest, fair, and just, not because of human laws or expectations, but because we recognize that God's eyes are always upon us. The fear of God compels us to live with compassion and responsibility toward others. It reminds us that we are called to love our neighbors, to treat others with respect, and to be peacemakers in a world that often promotes selfishness and division. When we fear God, we understand that every human being is made in His image, and that our actions toward others are a reflection of our relationship with Him.